Up Close with Father Robert Sirico, the co-founder and president of the Acton Institute. Welcome to Voice of the Vatican, Father Sirico.
I'm really delighted to be with you. Thanks for having me.
When the Acton Institute was founded over 25 years ago, what was your original vision? Have you persevered in maintaining that same vision, or how has it changed? And what are some of the unwavering core principles in Acton's mission?
It's interesting you should ask that question, because I think one of the most important things about founding an institute, or for that matter starting a business, is to always keep your eye on what we call mission drift. So you start with an idea, and very often people will come to you, especially if you're being successful in the initial stages or at any point, and they'll ask you to do other things that are good things to do, things you might want to do, but are not really germane to your essential mission. And so when we began the Acton Institute, it was to promote a free and virtuous society. Free because human freedom is essential for virtue, but virtue is what makes a society good. We want a society that's not only free, but also that's a good society as well. A society that is more than just, a society that's also charitable and fraternal. And I'm happy to say that we really have stayed with that core vision, that essential mission. It was really born out of my concern that in many religious circles there were many people who were enamored of various forms of Marxism in the form of liberation theology and similar movements where they wanted to baptize Karl Marx, in effect, to bring about a socialist government with good intentions on the part of many people, but I think with a very deleterious effect. And so we founded the Institute to offer an alternative to that way of thinking, to help people think through economic questions, to really bring sound economics to the religious world.
Is Marxism experiencing an uptick in trending political thought?
I think in a very real way, many of us anticipated with the fall of real communism in 1989, 1990, and the Soviet Union and the satellite countries surrounding the Soviet Union, that Marxism was dead. Certainly it was dead as a philosophical ideology because it had failed so manifestly for 70 years. But what's interesting is that the various branches of it have morphed into other extreme forms of environmentalism, extreme forms of feminism, indigenous movements, even these economic popularism, the economic popularism that we see in many parts of the world. You have to remember that even in the United States, one of the major candidates was an admitted socialist who had taken Marx very seriously. And so I think that it is an idea that is resilient because it presents a way of thinking about the world. I think it's a deadly false way of thinking about the world, but it gives people a certain taxonomy, a certain way of understanding the world. And that is that there is a basic hostility between those who are the creators of capital, the owners of capital, and workers. And I think that sounds very plausible. It morphs itself out into hostility between men and women, between humans and the environment, between heterosexuals and homosexuals, and indigenous people and colonizers. So it has this effect of explaining the whole world. And for that reason, it finds new followers in subsequent generations.
Tell us about your new book, Defending the Free Market.
I wrote Defending the Free Market because I felt that I'd been asked so many questions over and over again. I thought it would be good to have answers to these questions in one place. And as I began writing it, I realized that it needed to be presented almost as a homiletic tone rather than just an academic tone. And so there are lots of stories in it that come from my own ministry and from my own experience, both as a priest, as someone who preaches on a regular basis, but also as a student of economy. The book is being translated, and this spring will be available in Italian and in Spanish and it is also being translated into Chinese.
Why should parish priests be concerned about markets and the economy?
Everything that we do in society is touched by economics in some sense or another. Economics is basically the study of the best use of scarce resources. So in the first place, I think it's important to understand that when we pay the light bills for the church, or we send money to the missions, or when we feed the poor, when we pay the salaries of our collaborators, that all of this has to do with economy. But I think there's an even more fundamental theological reason, and that is because it is God who placed us in the context of scarcity, which in turn gives rise to the question of economics. I am of the firm conviction that our vocation takes place within the world, that Jesus Christ becomes man. He is not merely the Word, but He is the Word who becomes flesh and dwells among us. And that part of the whole plan of salvation is the sanctification of the world, and that involves business. If Christ is not with us in our workshops, in our studios, in front of our computer terminals, on the stock exchanges, then He's not Emmanuel. He's not God with us. And so a lot of this has to do with basically understanding how the world is made up, what the most prudent use of our resources are, without getting entangled with a kind of idolatry that thinks that the full meaning of the world terminates in the material world, that the purpose of the world is to go beyond the physical world.
What advice do you have for those who'd like to put the Catholic social teaching of subsidiarity and thus private solutions to poverty into action, but yet find themselves living in antagonistic political, economic, and cultural climates?
Well, of course, we have the model of the Scriptures and we have the model of the lives of the saints. What we need to do is tend to those who are in front of us, who are in need. We need to be inventive. We need to be creative. Each of us has been entrusted by God with certain talents. It's kind of like that parable in Jesus' gospel of the three men, the three servants who are given talents and are asked to be productive with them. So we need to discern what the use of our talents are. In fact, in more hostile environments, it's more important for us to create these alternatives to state aid, because we remember that our concern for the poor is not just a physical concern for the poor. It is that, it certainly is that, but it has to go to a more spiritual and profoundly humane and human dimension for the poor. So I would say thinking very creatively, being attentive to details and people around us, being attentive also to the what we call in economics the human capital that resides in people. In other words, if your view of the poor is just the poor as a recipient of your charity, then I want to suggest to you that your view of the poor is somewhat anemic. It's somewhat thin. You have to also see the poor as agents of their own betterment, agents of their own amelioration. And so it's really a collaboration, it's a partnership with the poor. What we're supposed to be doing is enabling people to rise to the level of their own capacities. The ancient, the medieval Jewish rabbi Maimonides has what is called the ladder of charity, and I think there are 8 or 9 levels. The next to the last level of the highest levels of charity is to give anonymously, and the highest level is to render a person in a state of being where they no longer need your charity. And I think that's what we really need to aim at.
What other specific work do you do internationally, as with your branch offices in Rome and Buenos Aires and Acton University?
Much of our international work is coordinated both through our office in Rome and in Buenos Aires. And the reason for that is, of course, the linguistic capacities that they have, and also the contacts that we've developed at the various Roman seminaries and within the Roman Curia and at the Vatican itself. Largely our programs are conferences or showing of our various films. It's developing networks of people so that we can help other religious leaders of all denominations think through these very important and vital questions in various societies.
You'll be making a pilgrimage soon to Fatima. How is Fatima connected with human freedom and the economy?
It's a particular privilege for me to be going to Fatima on the 100th anniversary of the first apparition because I was ordained on May 13th. And that is, of course, the first apparition of Our Lady to the children of Fatima. When Our Lady spoke to the children, among the things that she said was that a great evil would come out of Russia. Now, these children didn't understand what Marxism is or dialectical materialism was. They had only a very basic understanding of the problems of the world or the war that was raging, the First World War that was raging. But St. John Paul II said, and he who is very connected to Fatima in many ways, as we know, both because the assassination attempt that was prophesied in the third secret of Fatima took place on May 13th, on the feast of Our Lady of Fatima. So it's really a cluster of really exciting mystical things that are involved here. But John Paul II said that in a certain way the message of Fatima is a message of the entire 20th century. And you think about that when it began in 1917. So Our Lady was looking forward to the whole century. What is particularly pertinent is the errors that come out of Russia with regard to collectivism, the assault on the family, which is very much tied to the Marxist notion of the breakdown of patriarchal society, what they call patriarchal society, and the abolition of private property. Marx and Engels, his intellectual comrade, wrote books about this, and I think that Fatima speaks to the dignity of human beings and the importance of the salvation of souls. After all, what is Fatima? What is the message of Fatima? The message of Fatima is the salvation of souls. It's the message of the gospel of Jesus Christ. If it wasn't that, it wouldn't be authentic. And it has endured and perdured all these centuries because the church at that time understood the dangerous nature of the communist ideology. And today, I think we're challenged in a variety of ways with very similar ideologies. Perhaps not in the formal form of Marxism, although that is still prevalent in many areas of the world, but also forms of collectivism and ideologies that emphasize materialism, that are hostile to a belief in the transcendent, to a belief in God. And so I think for these reasons, the message of Fatima is quite timely for our day.
Thank you for being with Voice of the Vatican, Father Sirico. May God bless you.